It's time to change the narrative. It's important that we understand that even working in healthcare, burnout is not inevitable.
Welcome to The PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Tracy Bingaman, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in.
Hey, and welcome back to another episode of The PA is In. Today's episode is inspired by that e-learning that they make you take in the operating room where they tell you all about the fire triangle. So we're going to talk about the fire triangle, specific to how that relates to your level of personal and professional burnout and what we can do to identify areas of improvement within your specific situation. So in that e-learning, they tell you about the fire triangle, these three elements that fire needs in order to burn. These three things are oxygen, heat, and fuel, or a combustible material. These three things combined result in the chemical exothermic reaction that is fire. Oxygen and heat combined, not enough. Fuel and oxygen only, no fire. Heat and fuel with the absence of oxygen, no fire. It's when these three things combine at these critical levels that chemical reaction that is fire results. So as we think about this and relate it back to burnout, I'm going to give you some specific targets to focus your efforts on when you look at your life, your stress, your workload, what's really happening with you as a part of your personal and professional journey, to give you some targets to focus on to see how you can improve things in your life. So we're talking about fire, right? Oxygen, heat, fuel. So how does a fire extinguisher work? So we're talking about burnout relative to fire, but how do we get ahead of this burnout? How do we get ahead of this situation where things are out of control and burning and we don't have control of the situation? Well, we need a fire extinguisher, right? So how do fire extinguishers work? Fire extinguishers apply an agent that will cool the burning heat, that will smother the fuel or remove the oxygen so that the fire cannot continue to burn. So essentially, depending on what type of fire extinguisher it is, they take away one of those three things that a fire needs to burn. And in doing so, they stop the fire from burning. Here's a little burnout recap. So in case you missed it back in episode 185, we did a burnout 101. We talked about what is burnout, what are the symptoms of burnout, and gave you some really great self-care strategies. Where do you go from here if you're feeling burned out? So if you are sort of just bumping up against this burnout, that is another great resource is to scroll on back to episode 185 and check out Burnout 101. So how do we define burnout? Burnout is this triad. We're really into triangles today on this episode. Burnout is this triad of feeling overwhelmed, emotionally exhausted, and still wondering if you're doing enough. So I think this happens to us a lot when we think about our own personal limitations relative to the number of patients we can see in a day, the number of shifts we can work, the number of things that we can do during that shift, the number of patients that we can safely take care of while we're still taking care of ourselves, and then feeling like, was it enough? Did I do enough? Did I see enough people? Are things getting done? Is my charting of quality? We start to get in this sort of mental spiral. So another way to define this triad is a decreased sense of personal accomplishment, like you're not getting stuff done, a sense of depersonalization where you don't feel as connected to your patients or your coworkers as you once did, and this emotional exhaustion. Now, if you're listening to this and saying like, that's the triad, but how do I know? How do I know if I'm burned out or not? I created a burnout risk assessment quiz. So if you head to tracybingaman.com/burnout-quiz, it's also linked in the show notes. You can take this quiz. It takes 60 seconds and it gives you a rating of low, moderate, or high burnout risk, depending on your answers to those questions. It also points you to some resources that can help you start to put out that fire that we're going to talk about next. It's time to change the narrative. It's important that we understand that even working in healthcare, burnout is not inevitable. It's not this thing that you have to do as part of your career where you graduate, where you lean in, where you pick something acute, where you have poor boundaries, where you keep volunteering for extra shifts, and then you burn out. Burnout is no longer a badge of honor for healthcare workers. I want you to hear that loud and clear. Even if you've burned out in the past, even if you've burned out several times in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to burn out again. And if you're burned out right now, this is not the end of your story. There is a life that exists on the other side of burnout where you have time and margin and peace and your stress level is manageable. Note, I didn't say zero. There is no part of this life that you end up on the other side where you're like, everything is rainbows and butterflies and perfect, and I'm still working in healthcare, but no people ever stress me out, and I only have the most amazing patients. Like, that world doesn't exist. But what we need is the skills to tolerate a reasonable workload, a reasonable amount of stress, and to be able to cope with those so that stress doesn't roll over, bubble over, and turn into burnout. So, when you're evaluating your own degree of stress and burnout, take a minute to take the quiz. Take a look at those 3 elements of your burnout fire triangle, which we're going to talk about next. And I want you to identify areas that are within your control. You're going to have this temptation that when you think about this, all you can think about is the things that cannot be changed, the permanent, non modifiable risk factors of the situation. You're going to think this manager, this situation, this policy, this way that we do things, this is the way we've always done it. You're going to automatically think of reasons why you can't change the things that you are, most frustrated about the situation that you're in. I want you to focus on areas that are within your control. These things are the modifiable risk factors of your specific situation relative to burnout. You cannot single handedly tear down and build up the entire healthcare system on your own, especially not today. But you can change some things about your current situation. It doesn't require grand sweeping changes. It doesn't require you to quit your job and, move across the country and do these like crazy big shifts. What it does require is small tweaking, right? A little bit reduction in workload, a little bit adjustment in stress, a little bit of improving your coping mechanisms and the way that you deal with the emotional and physical stress that come along with working in healthcare. So I'm going to take these 3 elements of the fire triangle and relate them to your workload or your work situation. So the oxygen is the stress. The heat is your coping mechanisms. And when you have better coping mechanisms, you turn down that heat. And the fuel or combustible material is your workload, sort of what you're working on, what would be burning if you're at work, that workload. So I'm going to break down pretty quickly because I want you to do this on your own relative to your own specific situation, these 3 elements of the burnout fire triangle. And I'm going to give you a couple of ideas just to get the juices flowing, how you can make those small adjustments, how you can reduce or eliminate these factors contributing to your specific burnout so that it gives you some ideas for what you can do to actually modify things going forward. So let's start with stress. So this is the oxygen element of the fire. So listen, I know this. Working in medicine is stressful. Regardless of the setting, the acuity, where you work in healthcare, we have people's lives and health and quality of life and mental health and physical health, acute and chronic illnesses. We have people's lives in our hands. And that is stressful. Like I mentioned earlier, there is no world in which you get to a point where you say, medicine doesn't stress me out. I think, honestly, if you were to the point where medicine doesn't stress you out, you may be over that hump of depersonalization where you simply don't care. Because if you have patients on your schedule today, if you have patients in your care today, and you don't care at all, and you're not stressed, and you think, I couldn't mess anything up, everything's fine, everybody's fine, I honestly don't give a shit, and you have no stress level, that's probably a bad sign, right? You should never be to the point where taking care of someone is like stress level 0 for you. Now, that being said, it is hard to completely minimize the amount of stress that you have, but the stress and pressure is something that is different in different situations. And sometimes it's not even the medicine or the outcomes or the potential for litigation that stresses you out. So sometimes this stress comes from environments or people or situations or the schedule. So there are things that you can look at and say, yes, we know that stress exists. The second thing is, where is that stress coming from? Is it coming from the culture? Is it coming from the manager? Is it coming from strain for my relationship with my MA? Is it coming from the fact that consultants don't respect me in the hospital? Is it coming from the fact that we don't have a good system for transferring patients from here to there? Is it coming from the disrespect that my collaborating physicians are giving back to me? Where is it coming from? So not just stress exists, but really kind of focus on what is stressing me out during this time, and is that something that I can change or not? And then once you identify it, you say, how can I minimize the impact that that stress has on me, on my mental and physical health? So I played field hockey in high school, and our coach used to read this poem, which I didn't sort of pull up, so I don't have at the ready, but it was all about attitude. We read it before every game. And it essentially said, it was sort of like this serenity prayer, but like a little bit different. So it was like, I can't change the way that people treat me. I can't change what happens to me. The only thing that I can control is my attitude and how I let that influence me and how I react to the way that things happen. And being in healthcare, there is going to be stress. There are going to be, politics and relationships and situations, all of these things. What you can control is how much you let that stress affect you. And we'll kind of go into coping mechanisms next, but do you have the tools? Do you, have the ability to de-escalate these situations with other people or patients or family members? Can you turn down this stress? And what I have found in my journey with burnout and my experience with stress as a provider is that you don't have to turn it down that much to make a big difference. But if you are at that boiling point, if every day you don't have ability to decompress, so like Tuesday's stress bubbles into Wednesday's stress, or yesterday's shift bubbles into today's shift, those things are compounding and you don't have the ability to sort of have a release valve. So we're going to move now into the heat aspect, which is your own coping mechanisms. Do you have a way to complete that stress cycle? Do you have a way to tell your nervous system, like, hey, I ran a code and everything's fine. You don't have to be in fight or flight for the next 24 hours. We did an entire episode on 7 ways to complete your stress cycle. That those things are things that you can do, breathing and exercise and very specific things that you can do to notify your nervous system that nothing is on fire. See what I did there with my nice fire analogy in our burnout fire triangle episode? To tell your nervous system, like, there is no fire, there is no tiger, we are safe, we can rest and digest and recharge and show up well again tomorrow, but that we are not constantly in that fight or flight, in that like really queued up nervous system state. Do you have a mechanism to decompress after work? Because if you don't, or maybe if you only do it on the weekends and throughout the week that stress is building, 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 you don't have a release valve, you don't have an ability to decompress after work or before work, so that you're not sort of carrying all of that baggage of the last day and the last day and the last day into the next day. And do you have the ability to recharge? It's hard to do this if your nervous system is constantly in fight or flight, but do you have that ability to rest and to really lean into the fact that you don't have to be doing something all of the time. You don't have to be achieving something all of the time, that you can let your nervous system rest and let your body recharge so that it can show up better. So you can make that diagnosis. You can take really great care of your patients again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And third, but certainly not last, is the fuel, which when we're talking about burnout is your workload. Do you feel overwhelmed by the amount of patients that you're being asked to see? And this is tricky because I think particularly if you work in a specialty where you're taking care of multiple things at a visit, you might be seeing the same number of patients that you saw 5 years ago, but those patients are sicker or they want to talk about more things. And you have maybe less time because now you're doing, I think as you go through your career, sometimes you get more people on your schedule, but sometimes it's sort of sneaky because it's the same amount of patients, but higher acuity. So when you think about workload, you need to ask yourself, how can I get some help at work and at home? Can you adjust your template? Can you hire another team member? Can you increase your personal efficiency? Is there a way to change the workflow so it's less of a burden on you, that you have more support from your clinical or clerical staff, that they're doing more prep, that they're helping you to get things ready? The thing about all three of these aspects of stress and your coping mechanisms and your personal workload and workflow at work is that your situation is unique. So it's impossible for me on this episode to say, this is exactly what you need to do in order to decrease your stress and increase your resilience and have more effective coping mechanisms and adjust your workload. And there's not a perfect answer for anyone. But even just having these things top of mind as you head into work and go through your day, what's stressing me out specifically? What am I doing about that throughout the day from a coping standpoint? What am I doing for that outside of work in terms of coping? And also the workload. It didn't seem that bad at first, but now it's gotten really heavy and these other things have been added to my plate. What can I do to offload these things? What can I do to have time to deal with the things that are being asked of me alongside some of my clinical responsibilities? The bottom line here is we can't have sick people taking care of other sick people. And burnout is a real, true mental, physical illness. It is something that is happening when stress boils over and when we don't have the ability to cope effectively. You are a person first and a healthcare provider second. If you need help along the way, I am here. I have been there. I have not been in every specific situation, but I have talked to a lot of you who are dealing with burnout, who are recovering from burnout, who are trying to make changes to minimize this effect on them and their team and their clinical practice. There are links in the show notes to set up a phone call with me. I'd love to give you my ideas on how to heal from burnout given your specific situation. So take a look at that link, find a time that works for you. I'd love to hop on a call. I always feel very energized when I'm done talking to you guys because as an outsider, I can see things about your situation that you can't see because it's hard to see the forest for the trees. So getting an outsider's perspective on burnout and just saying, hey, did you try this? Or did you think about that? Or, how can you offload some of these things that are on your plate? I hope that this resonated with you. And even if you're not feeling super burned out, that this gave you some ideas for how you can fine tune things to be less stressful, to have a more cohesive workflow, to be working more strategically and efficiently and effectively so that you can do really well at work, take great care of your patients, but show up really well outside of work and do the things that you enjoy with energy and vigor and happiness, and that you're not leaving it all on the field at work like I was when I was in the depths of burnout. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to another episode of The PA is In. That's all for now. This PA is out.
Congratulations, you've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.